Liz Cheney stood up from her chair, face red with anger, pointing directly at Jasmine Crockett across the committee room. "You have no idea what you're talking about," she screamed, her voice echoing off the marble walls. But instead of backing down, Crockett simply smiled. A calm, knowing smile that would soon make Cheney look completely foolish in front of the entire nation. What happened in the next 20 minutes wasn't just a heated exchange between two congresswomen. It was the moment a rising Democratic star used nothing but facts, composure, and that devastating smile to completely dismantle one of the most powerful Republicans in Washington. Before we dive into this incredible showdown, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss these epic political moments. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this plays out. The committee hearing room buzzed with tension as cameras rolled, capturing every second of what would become the most talked-about political confrontation of the year. Cheney, the former Wyoming representative known for her fierce attacks and unwavering positions, thought she had Crockett cornered. She was dead wrong. This is the story of how a calm smile and the truth became the most powerful weapons in politics. To understand why this confrontation was so explosive, you need to know exactly who these two women are and what brought them to this moment. Elizabeth Lynn Cheney wasn't just any politician, she was political royalty. The daughter of former Vice President Dick Cheney, she had been groomed for power her entire life. At 57, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. Cheney had built her reputation as a fierce conservative warrior. She was known for her sharp tongue, her ability to intimidate opponents, and her unwavering belief that she was always the smartest person in the room. Even when she broke with her own party over certain issues, she did it with the same aggressive certainty that had defined her entire career. In committee hearings, Cheney was notorious for her prosecutorial style. She would lean forward, raise her voice, and use her years of experience to make younger members look foolish. She had done it dozens of times before, and she had every reason to believe this day would be no different. Cheney wore her usual dark business suit, her blonde hair perfectly styled, sitting at the long mahogany table with the same commanding presence she'd held for years. To her, this hearing was just another opportunity to show everyone why she remained one of the most formidable figures in Washington politics. Jasmine Felicia Crockett represented everything Cheney wasn't. At 42, the Texas Democrat was relatively new to Washington, but she had already made waves with her brilliant legal mind and unshakable composure under pressure. Unlike Cheney's inherited political dynasty, Crockett had earned every single thing she had achieved. Before coming to Congress, Crockett had been a successful civil rights attorney who specialized in taking on powerful opponents and winning. She had a reputation for staying calm in the most heated situations, using facts and logic to destroy arguments rather than volume and intimidation. Crockett sat across from Cheney in a sharp blue blazer, her natural hair styled professionally, a small notebook open in front of her. While other committee members shuffled papers nervously, Crockett appeared completely relaxed. She had done her homework, and she was ready for whatever was coming. What Cheney didn't know was that Crockett had spent the previous night preparing for exactly this kind of confrontation. She had studied every angle, gathered every fact, and prepared responses for every possible attack. While Cheney relied on her reputation and her voice, Crockett relied on something much more powerful, the truth. This wasn't just another boring committee meeting that would be forgotten by the evening news cycle. The topic under discussion involved major policy decisions that would affect millions of Americans. The committee was reviewing legislation that could reshape how the government handled certain key issues, and every word spoken would be scrutinized by the media and the public. For Cheney, this hearing was a chance to remind everyone why she was still a force to be reckoned with, even after losing her primary election. She needed to show that she could still dominate a room and control the narrative. For Crockett, this was an opportunity to prove that the new generation of Democratic leaders could stand up to the old guard's intimidation tactics. She represented not just her district in Texas, but all the young, diverse voices that were fighting to be heard in Washington. The room was packed with reporters, staffers, and C-SPAN cameras. Social media was already buzzing with anticipation. Everyone could feel that something big was about to happen. What none of them expected was how completely the tables were about to turn. The hearing had been going on for about an hour when the first sparks began to fly. The committee chairman had just finished his opening remarks, and members were beginning their questioning period. Everything seemed routine until Crockett raised her hand and politely asked to address a point that had been made earlier. "Chairwoman Cheney," Crockett began, her voice steady and professional, "I'd like to clarify something you mentioned in your opening statement. You claimed that the proposed legislation would create unnecessary government overreach, but the facts don't seem to support that conclusion." Cheney's eyes narrowed immediately. She wasn't used to being challenged so directly, especially not by someone she considered a junior member. "Congresswoman Crockett," she replied, her tone already showing signs of irritation, "I think you might want to review the actual text of the bill before making such statements." The condescension was unmistakable. Several people in the room shifted uncomfortably. Crockett, however, simply smiled and opened her notebook. "Oh, I have reviewed it," she said calmly. "All 247 pages. And I've also reviewed the similar legislation that was passed in 12 other states, along with the court challenges and the outcomes. Would you like me to share those findings?" A few reporters in the back of the room perked up, sensing that this exchange was about to get interesting. Cheney's jaw tightened visibly. "Congresswoman Crockett," Cheney said, leaning forward slightly, "with all due respect, I've been doing this a lot longer than you have. I understand the implications of this legislation better than someone who's been in Washington for 5 minutes." The insult was clear, and murmurs rippled through the room. This was exactly the kind of dismissive attitude that had made Cheney so many enemies over the years. But Crockett didn't take the bait. Instead, her smile grew slightly wider. "You're absolutely right that experience matters," Crockett replied smoothly. "That's why I've brought the experience of actually practicing law in this area for over 15 years before coming to Congress. I've seen firsthand how similar policies have played out in real courtrooms with real people." She paused, letting that sink in. "But if you'd prefer to rely on assumptions rather than evidence, that's certainly your choice." The room was now completely silent except for the soft clicking of camera shutters. Even the staffers had stopped shuffling papers. Everyone could feel the tension building like electricity in the air. Cheney's face was starting to redden. She was used to her opponents backing down when she asserted her authority, but Crockett wasn't just refusing to back down. She was politely pushing back with facts. "Let me be very clear," Cheney said, her voice rising slightly. "This legislation is a disaster waiting to happen. Anyone who can't see that either hasn't read it carefully enough or doesn't understand the broader constitutional issues at play." It was a classic Cheney move. Attack the competence and intelligence of her opponent rather than address the substance of their argument. But Crockett was ready for it. "I appreciate your concern about constitutional issues," Crockett said, her tone remaining perfectly level. "Perhaps you could point to the specific constitutional provision you believe would be violated, because I've reviewed the relevant case law, including the recent decisions from the circuit courts, and I'm not seeing the conflict you're referring to." She flipped through her notebook as she spoke, clearly looking at detailed notes rather than speaking off the cuff. The contrast with Cheney's vague generalities was stark. "Are you referring to the Commerce Clause analysis from the Morrison case? The due process concerns raised in the Williams decision? Or perhaps the equal protection framework established in the landmark Brown ruling?" Each legal citation was delivered with quiet confidence. Crockett wasn't showing off. She was demonstrating that she had done the work that Cheney clearly hadn't. Cheney was clearly thrown off balance. She had expected to intimidate a junior member with her reputation and her aggressive style. Instead, she was facing someone who knew the law better than she did and wasn't impressed by her bluster. "Congresswoman Crockett," Cheney said, her voice now noticeably strained, "I don't need a lecture on constitutional law from someone who's been grandstanding for the cameras since she got here." The personal attack was a clear sign that Cheney was losing control of the exchange. Several committee members looked uncomfortable. This was exactly the kind of behavior that had made Cheney so unpopular with her colleagues. But Crockett didn't react with anger or defensiveness. Instead, she simply tilted her head slightly and maintained that calm smile. "I'm sorry you feel that way," she said quietly. "I was simply trying to have a substantive discussion about the legal issues. If you'd prefer not to engage with the specific constitutional questions I raised, that's fine. But I think the American people deserve to have their representatives actually discuss the facts rather than resort to personal attacks." The rebuke was delivered so gently that it took a moment for its impact to register. But when it did, you could practically hear the air being sucked out of the room. Crockett had just called out one of the most powerful Republicans in Washington for avoiding the substance and resorting to personal attacks, and she had done it with the kind of calm professionalism that made Cheney's behavior look even worse by comparison. Cheney was now visibly angry. Her face was flushed, and her hands were clenched on the table in front of her. She had built her entire political identity around being the person who dominated these kinds of exchanges, and this young Democrat was making her look foolish in front of the entire country. "You want to talk about facts?" Cheney snapped, her voice getting louder. "Here's a fact. This legislation is going to hurt American families, and anyone who supports it is either naive or doesn't care about the consequences." It was another attempt to change the subject from the specific legal issues to broad emotional appeals. But Crockett wasn't going to let her off the hook. "I absolutely want to talk about how this affects American families," Crockett replied, her smile never wavering. "In fact, I have data from the 12 states that have already implemented similar policies. Would you like me to share those numbers? Because they show exactly the opposite of what you're claiming." She reached for another section of her notebook, clearly prepared to back up her statement with specific statistics. The contrast was becoming impossible to ignore. Crockett had come prepared with facts, data, and legal precedents, while Cheney was relying on volume and intimidation. "The families in my district who have been affected by these policies have seen measurable improvements in their situations," Crockett continued. "I can give you specific examples if you'd like, though I'll respect their privacy by not using names." The offer to provide concrete examples was the final straw. Cheney realized that she was being outmaneuvered by someone who had actually done the work, while she had come in expecting to coast on her reputation. That's when she completely lost her composure. What happened next would be replayed on social media for weeks. Liz Cheney, one of the most experienced politicians in Washington, completely lost her cool in the most spectacular way possible. "You know what?" Cheney suddenly shouted, her voice echoing off the chamber walls as she shot up from her chair. "I am so sick of listening to this sanctimonious nonsense." The outburst was so sudden and so loud that several people in the room actually jumped. The C-SPAN cameras immediately zoomed in, capturing every detail of Cheney's red face and wild gestures. "You come in here with your little notebook," Cheney continued, her voice getting higher and more strained. "Thinking you can lecture me about constitutional law? I was fighting for constitutional principles when you were still in law school." She was pointing directly at Crockett now, her finger shaking with rage. The scene was uncomfortable to watch. A powerful politician having a complete meltdown on national television. "You have no idea what you're talking about," Cheney screamed, slamming her hand on the table. "You're nothing but a grandstanding activist who thinks she can come to Washington and change everything overnight." Throughout Cheney's entire tirade, Crockett did something remarkable. She didn't interrupt, she didn't shout back, and she didn't show even a hint of anger or defensiveness. Instead, she sat back in her chair, folded her hands calmly, and maintained that same serene smile she'd been wearing all day. The contrast was devastating. On one side of the room, you had a veteran politician screaming, red-faced and completely out of control. On the other side, you had a younger congresswoman sitting calmly, looking like she was watching a child have a temper tantrum. When Cheney finally finished her outburst and sat back down, breathing heavily, the room was dead silent. Everyone was staring, waiting to see how Crockett would respond. She waited a full 10 seconds before speaking, long enough for the weight of what had just happened to sink in, but not so long that it became awkward. "Are you finished?" Crockett asked quietly, her voice so calm it seemed to make Cheney's screaming even more ridiculous in retrospect. Cheney glared at her but didn't respond. "Okay," Crockett continued, that same gentle smile never leaving her face. "I want to address what just happened here because I think it's important for the American people to understand what they just witnessed." She looked directly into the C-SPAN camera as she spoke, acknowledging that this moment was bigger than just the committee room. "Congresswoman Cheney just had what appears to be an emotional breakdown because I asked her to discuss the specific constitutional issues related to this legislation. Instead of engaging with the legal questions I raised, she chose to scream at me. and make personal attacks. Her tone remained conversational, as if she were explaining something to a friend rather than delivering what was essentially a devastating political blow. Now, I want to be clear. I have tremendous respect for anyone who serves in Congress, regardless of party. This is a difficult job, and we're all trying to do our best for the American people. But what you just saw is exactly what's wrong with Washington today. Crockett opened her notebook again, and you could see Cheney tense up, knowing that more facts were coming. Earlier, I asked Congresswoman Cheney to identify the specific constitutional provisions that would be violated by this legislation. She couldn't do it. I asked her to address the legal precedents I cited. She refused. I offered to share data from states that have already implemented similar policies. She ignored it. Each point was delivered calmly, methodically, like a prosecutor laying out a case to a jury. Instead of engaging with any of the substance, she chose to attack my qualifications, my motivations, and my character. And when I continued to try to have a professional discussion, she started screaming. Crockett paused, letting that sink in. The American people deserve better than this. They deserve representatives who will discuss the facts, engage with the evidence, and have serious conversations about serious issues. They don't deserve to watch grown adults have temper tantrums when they're asked to back up their claims with actual information. But Crockett wasn't done. She had been saving the best for last. Now, since Congresswoman Cheney seems unwilling or unable to discuss the constitutional issues she raised, let me address them for the record. What followed was a masterclass in legal analysis. For the next 5 minutes, Crockett systematically addressed every constitutional concern that could possibly be raised about the legislation. She cited specific cases, quoted relevant passages from Supreme Court decisions, and explained the legal reasoning in terms that anyone could understand. It was clear that she had anticipated this exact scenario and had prepared accordingly. While Cheney had come in expecting to intimidate her way through the hearing, Crockett had done the actual work of understanding the issues inside and out. So to summarize, she concluded, every constitutional concern that could reasonably be raised about this legislation has been addressed by existing case law, and the policies have been successfully implemented in multiple states without legal challenge. She closed her notebook and looked directly at Cheney. Now, if you have specific legal objections beyond "this is a disaster," I'm happy to discuss them. But I think the American people have seen enough screaming for one day. The silence that followed was deafening. Cheney sat in her chair, staring at the table in front of her, clearly realizing that she had just been completely outmaneuvered and humiliated on national television. Other committee members were looking back and forth between the two women, stunned by what they had just witnessed. Several were clearly trying to suppress smiles, while others looked genuinely uncomfortable. The committee chairman, clearly eager to move past the awkwardness, quickly called for a recess. But it was too late. The damage was done. In the span of 20 minutes, Crockett had used nothing but facts, preparation, and unshakable composure to make one of the most feared politicians in Washington look like an amateur. As the cameras continued to roll, Crockett gathered her papers calmly while Cheney sat frozen in place, clearly processing the magnitude of what had just happened to her reputation. The video clips were already being uploaded to social media before the committee members had even left the room. Within minutes of the hearing ending, social media exploded like a digital fireworks show. The video of Cheney's meltdown and Crockett's calm response was being shared faster than anyone could count. The hashtag #Crockett Smile started trending within 30 minutes. The image of Crockett sitting calmly with that serene smile while Cheney screamed in the background became an instant meme. Twitter users began creating side-by-side comparisons with captions like, "When you did the homework versus when you didn't," and "This is what preparation looks like." One particularly viral tweet showed a screenshot of Crockett's calm face with the caption, "When someone tries to intimidate you but you came with receipts." It was retweeted over 50,000 times in the first hour. But the memes weren't the most important part of the social media response. Political commentators from across the spectrum were weighing in, and even many conservatives were criticizing Cheney's behavior. A prominent Republican strategist tweeted, "I disagree with Crockett's politics, but that was a masterclass in how to handle a hostile opponent." Cheney looked completely unprofessional. A Democratic political analyst wrote, "This is what the future of the Democratic Party looks like. Smart, prepared, unflappable, and devastating when attacked." Even news personalities were getting into the action. One cable news host tweeted a gif of Crockett's smile with the caption, "This smile just ended a career." By the evening news cycle, every major network was covering the confrontation. The coverage was remarkably consistent across different outlets. Even conservative media couldn't defend Cheney's behavior. One cable news network ran the story with the headline, "Veteran Congresswoman Loses Composure in Committee Hearing." The report showed the full exchange, and the contrast between the two women's behavior was even more stark when edited together in a news package. A major newspaper's political columnist wrote, "In 20 years of covering Washington politics, I've rarely seen such a complete role reversal. The experienced politician looked like an amateur, while the relative newcomer demonstrated exactly the kind of professionalism and preparation that voters say they want from their representatives." Even international media picked up the story. A British newspaper ran it with the headline, "American Politician's Meltdown Goes Viral," accompanied by analysis about what the incident revealed about the current state of American politics. The immediate impact on both women's careers was dramatic, but in completely opposite directions. For Cheney, the incident was an unmitigated disaster. Within 24 hours, video compilations of her screaming were being used in attack ads against Republican candidates in competitive districts. Her own former colleagues were distancing themselves from her behavior. One Republican senator, when asked about the incident by reporters, simply said, "That's not how we should conduct ourselves in committee hearings. The American people expect better." Political donors who had previously supported Cheney began quietly backing away. Several canceled planned fundraising events, citing scheduling conflicts. The message was clear. Her brand of aggressive politics was no longer seen as an asset. For Crockett, the impact was exactly the opposite. Democratic leadership took notice immediately. The party had been looking for new voices who could effectively counter Republican attacks, and Crockett had just demonstrated exactly that skill on national television. Within a week, she was being invited to appear on major news programs. Booking producers who had never heard of her before were suddenly eager to get her on their shows. Democratic fundraising organizations reported a surge in donations specifically mentioning Crockett's name. Small-dollar donors across the country were contributing to her campaign with notes saying things like, "Thank you for showing them how it's done," and "Keep smiling and fighting." The Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee immediately began featuring Crockett in their fundraising materials, using her calm smile as a symbol of the party's new approach to political combat. But the significance of the confrontation went far beyond the immediate impact on two individual politicians. Political analysts began discussing what the incident revealed about the changing nature of American politics. The traditional model of political intimidation, using experience, volume, and aggression to dominate opponents, had been completely neutralized by preparation, composure, and facts. It was a master class in how to handle bullying behavior in professional settings. Young political staffers across Washington began studying the video, trying to understand exactly how Crockett had maintained her composure under such intense pressure. Her technique became a case study in political communications classes. The incident also highlighted the generational divide in American politics. Cheney represented the old way of doing things: rely on your reputation, attack your opponents personally, and use volume to substitute for substance. Crockett represented a new approach: do your homework, stay calm, and let the facts speak for themselves. 6 months later, the impact of that 20-minute exchange was still being felt throughout Washington. Crockett had become one of the most sought-after Democratic surrogates in the country. Her ability to stay calm under pressure while delivering devastating counter-arguments made her invaluable in high-stakes situations. She was appointed to several high-profile committees and became a regular presence on major news programs. Political betting markets began listing her as a potential candidate for higher office, despite her relatively short time in Congress. Cheney, meanwhile, found her influence continuing to wane. The incident had crystallized many people's existing concerns about her temperament and judgment. Former allies became increasingly reluctant to appear with her publicly. More importantly, the confrontation changed how other politicians approached similar situations. The Crockett model, extensive preparation, calm delivery, and letting opponents destroy themselves, became the preferred method for handling aggressive questioning. Beyond politics, the incident resonated with people in all kinds of professional settings. The video became required viewing in business schools and corporate training programs as an example of how to handle hostile colleagues or clients. Women's professional organizations used Crockett's performance as a case study in dealing with workplace intimidation. The image of her calm smile in the face of screaming became a symbol of grace under pressure. Self-help and leadership experts began analyzing the exchange, pointing out how Crockett's preparation and emotional control had allowed her to turn what should have been an attack into a career-defining victory. The phrase, "Crockett's smile," entered the popular lexicon as a way to describe remaining calm and professional when others lose their composure. Political scientists and communications experts identified several key factors that made Crockett's performance so effective. First and foremost was her preparation. She had clearly anticipated the confrontation and had prepared specific facts and legal citations to counter any attack, demonstrating that homework beats reputation every time. This wasn't just surface-level preparation either. She had studied constitutional law, researched similar legislation in other states, and even prepared for the exact type of personal attacks that politicians like Cheney typically employ when backed into a corner. Her notebook wasn't just a prop. It was a weapon loaded with ammunition that she deployed with surgical precision. Communication experts noted that her preparation went beyond just knowing the facts. She had organized them in a way that could be easily accessed and delivered under pressure, showing the difference between simply being knowledgeable and being strategically prepared for combat. The methodical way she flipped through her notes while maintaining eye contact demonstrated a level of preparation that most politicians only dream of achieving. Equally important was her emotional control, as by refusing to match Cheney's emotional intensity, she made the contrast between them even more stark and allowed viewers to see the difference between professionalism and chaos. This wasn't just about staying calm under pressure, it was a masterclass in emotional intelligence. By maintaining her composure while Cheney spiraled into rage, Crockett demonstrated the kind of leadership temperament that Americans desperately want to see from their elected officials. She understood that the person who loses their temper first usually loses the argument, regardless of what facts they might have on their side. Psychological studies of the exchange later revealed that Crockett's steady breathing, relaxed posture, and consistent facial expression created a subconscious impression of trustworthiness and competence, while Cheney's wild gestures and raised voice triggered viewer responses associated with instability and unreliability. Body language experts noted that Crockett's slightly tilted head and maintained smile conveyed both confidence and approachability, creating an immediate connection with viewers who saw her as someone they could trust with important decisions. Her focus on substance over style proved devastating, as while Cheney relied on volume and reputation, Crockett focused on facts and evidence that couldn't be shouted down or dismissed. This represented a fundamental shift in how political debates could be won, not through who could scream the loudest or who had the most impressive resume, but through who had done the actual work of understanding the issues. Crockett's legal background gave her a significant advantage here, as she was trained to build arguments based on evidence rather than emotion. What made this particularly effective was her ability to translate complex legal concepts into language that ordinary Americans could understand, bridging the gap between technical expertise and public communication. She demonstrated that being smart isn't enough. You have to be able to communicate that intelligence in a way that connects with your audience. Her systematic citation of specific cases and statutes while explaining their real-world implications showed mastery of both legal expertise and public education. Perhaps most brilliantly, she employed strategic patience, letting Cheney destroy her own credibility rather than trying to attack her directly, proving that sometimes the best defense is letting your opponent defeat themselves. This required incredible discipline, as many politicians would have felt compelled to match Cheney's aggression or fire back with personal attacks of their own. Instead, Crockett understood that Cheney was handing her a gift, the chance to look professional and competent while her opponent looked unhinged and desperate. This approach reflected a deep understanding of human psychology and media dynamics, recognizing that viewers would be more influenced by the contrast in behavior than by any specific point either politician made. Finally, her camera awareness showed she understood that this was being broadcast and played to the broader audience rather than just the room, recognizing that millions of Americans were watching and judging every moment. Modern politicians must always remember that they're not just speaking to their immediate audience, but to the entire nation through social media clips and news coverage. Crockett's occasional direct looks into the camera, her positioning that kept both herself and Cheney in frame during key moments, and her awareness of how her expressions would read on screen all demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of modern political communication. These lessons became standard teaching material in political communication courses across the country, with professors using the exchange as a perfect example of how preparation, composure, and strategic thinking can triumph over aggression and intimidation, fundamentally changing how future political leaders approached high-stakes confrontations. Perhaps most importantly, the incident established a new standard for political discourse. The old model of winning through intimidation was exposed as not just ineffective, but actively counterproductive when facing a prepared opponent. Politicians across the spectrum began investing more heavily in research and preparation, knowing that they could no longer rely on bluster and personal attacks to carry them through difficult exchanges. The incident also demonstrated the power of maintaining professionalism, even when others abandon it. Crockett's calm demeanor didn't just make her look good, it made Cheney's behavior look even worse by comparison. As we look back on this confrontation months later, it's clear that we witnessed more than just a heated exchange between two congresswomen. We saw a changing of the guard in American politics, the moment when preparation and professionalism definitively triumphed over intimidation and volume. The incident serves as a reminder that, in our hyper-connected, social media-driven world, every public moment can become a defining moment. Character, preparation, and composure matter more than ever because millions of people are watching and judging. For anyone facing their own professional challenges, Crockett's example provides a powerful template. Do your homework, stay calm, let the facts speak for themselves, and sometimes the most powerful response to aggression is a confident smile. The confrontation between Liz Cheney and Jasmine Crockett will be remembered as the day American politics learned that the loudest voice in the room isn't necessarily the most powerful one. Sometimes, the quiet confidence of someone who did their homework can be more devastating than any amount of screaming. And that calm smile, it didn't just destroy an argument, it helped define a new era of political leadership. Thanks for watching this incredible political showdown unfold. If you enjoyed seeing how preparation and composure can triumph over intimidation and volume, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We'll be covering more of these game-changing political moments, so you won't want to miss what happens next in the ongoing evolution of American politics. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most powerful weapon in politics is a confident smile and a well-prepared argument.